Welcome everybody to this meeting of Cleveland Park Smart Growth. Tonight, we're very happy to have with us Heba El-Gawish of the Office of Planning, and she's going to give a short presentation about the new development guidelines report that's come out, and then leave some time for people to ask questions about it. So we are recording, so if you want to, go back and watch this later, you will be able to do that. So I'm handing it over to you, Heba. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Ellen and Bob, for having me tonight. My name is Heba El-Gawish. I'm a senior cross-systems planner within the DC Office of Planning and the project manager for the Connecticut Avenue Development Guidelines. So I'll try to run through my presentation fairly quickly just to leave enough time for Q&A. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen portions of this already, but let me start sharing my screen here. All right, I'm going to organize my screen a little bit just so I can see. Okay, so as many of you know, the Office of Planning released the draft Connecticut Avenue Development Guidelines on Friday, April 21st for public review and comment. And the draft document can be found on the project website at publicinput.com/RCW-Connecticut. And the public comment period will run through Friday, May 26th. There's a public comment form on the project website where you can provide your feedback on any parts of the draft online. And then we will be on Thursday, May 25th, the Office of Planning will present the draft document for the Historic Preservation Review Board's consideration and support. And community members also have the option to submit written testimony or sign up to testify in person at the hearing. And you can do so at the link provided on this slide, and I will share this presentation with Bob and Ellen afterwards so people can refer to it. The details are also provided on the project website, and the link is provided there as well. So just as an overview, the Connecticut Avenue Development Guidelines sets a framework for integrating mixed-use development into the Woodley Park and Cleveland Park historic districts. This framework supports the need for housing at various income levels and household sizes while sustaining a thriving commercial corridor, as well as enhancing the public realm for residents and visitors. With the future land uses established as part of the comprehensive plan, these guidelines take an urban design approach to demonstrate how increased building heights and densities could be implemented in the commercial areas around Cleveland Park and Woodley Park metro stations. These guidelines are intended to be used by various entities, private property owners, developers, design professionals, district agencies, and community groups when developing or reviewing proposals for development projects or public space improvements. So, for example, HPRB or the Zoning Commission in their evaluation of development proposals, as well as the Office of Planning in its preparation of reports for both of those entities, the Public Space Committee in reviewing public space improvements, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, as well as community groups in evaluating development projects as they come forward in those neighborhoods. District and federal agencies can also use these documents to consider public investments and planning to accommodate projected growth along the corridor. So in terms of the structure and organization of the document, it opens up with an executive summary that outlines the purpose of the development guidelines and how they were produced, an introduction chapter that starts with the background and evolution of the segment of the corridor, applicability of the guidelines to development, and ways in which their implementation can advance housing equity goals and ROC request. The building design guidelines outlined in Chapter 2 describes how compatibility of new development can be achieved within the historic districts through design strategies that address building massing and height transition, facade modulation, street wall design, and building projection, as well as architectural materials and articulation. And then Chapter 3 of the document is oriented around the public realm strategy to promote an inclusive and safe public realm for residents and visitors of all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds and abilities. Finally, a supplemental appendix outlines the planning process, including the ways in which a racial equity lens was applied to the background research and analysis, as well as the community engagement approach and the disaggregation of data by race, and the underscoring of equity policies through this urban design framework. So the Cleveland Park and Woodley Park are home to a mix of architectural styles that have earned these areas listing in National Register of Historic Places. So the development guidelines provide a blueprint for adapting the built environment in these historic districts to guide growth and change alongside preservation. Using this guidance in development and zoning applications will lead to greater equitable outcomes in the distribution of affordable housing, particularly in Rock Creek West, and a socioeconomically diverse population that is reflective of the district's demographic makeup. And as described in the 2019 Housing Equity Report, as well as the 2021 Rock Creek West Roadmap, achieving the affordable housing goals in Rock Creek West requires leveraging the district's financing tools, as well as land use regulations through zoning and development. So in Cleveland Park and Woodley Park, this means contributing a greater number of set-aside affordable units through zoning map amendments that are subject to inclusionary zoning plus, or otherwise known as IZ plus, as well as planned unit developments. So the graphic on this slide illustrates how IZ plus can be triggered for a development project. So for example, a property with an existing zone that allows a building floor area ratio of 2 or 3 FAR would be subject to a set-aside affordable housing requirement of 10%. And if this property were to get rezoned to allow a density of 4 or 6 FAR as described in this document, then the set-aside for affordable housing through IZ Plus would increase to 20%. So the Office of Planning's focus on development regulations and enabling a public realm to accommodate equitable growth is occurring in tandem with other partner agencies that are focused on housing finance tools, such as the High Needs Area Tax Abatement and Housing Production Trust Fund, targeting qualifying affordable housing projects in Rock Creek West. The draft development guidelines was produced through a robust year-long community engagement process. And to achieve an inclusive and meaningful engagement outcomes, the project team organized a range of in-person and online activities throughout the past year that were both open to the broad public as well as targeted to specific groups. And in order to ensure representation across a broad sector of the community and the district as a whole, opportunities to participate online, as well as focus group conversations with targeted stakeholders and pop-ups at neighborhood events, offered a variety of ways to engage and created safe spaces to participate in this process. So focusing on design guidance that is provided in the document as it relates to Cleveland Park, the building design guidelines provide guidance for future zoning changes in Cleveland Park to support building heights of up to 75 feet or a floor area ratio of 5.0 FAR. And this was, the project team modeled a number of development scenarios that were presented to the community throughout this planning process, and specifically in the fall through the design community community conversations, and explored a number of development scenarios to look at ways to accommodate the additional height and densities as outlined in the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. And 75 feet was determined as the maximum height that could be achieved under a medium density residential designation that can still be compatible in the historic district. The building design guidelines for Cleveland Park recommend ways to achieve compatibility through design strategies that address building massing and height transitions, facade modulation, street wall design, building projections, and materials. So this looks at step backs and building projections, as well as architectural materials and articulation that can complement the architectural styles found in the Cleveland Park commercial area. And the building design guidelines also provide further strategies for siting the building massing and transitioning of height that are context specific. So for example, upper story additions above contributing buildings that are part of a uniform row should acknowledge the original roof line with deeper setbacks, as shown on the graphic on the left. For corner sites, such as the Sam's Park and Shop, fully designing new construction or additions on all sides to provide a clear differentiation between the historic structure and new construction, as well as to establish a more pronounced corridor. And that is the graphic shown on the right. The design of the building street wall is another focus of these development guidelines. The street wall refers to the line of building facades that face a street, which shape the level of visual interest on each block. The street wall design guidelines address the height of a new building street wall in relation to adjacent buildings, as well as the modulation of storefront entrances and building projections to maintain a degree of visual interest. And then finally, guidance on complementary architectural details and materials are included as a way to integrate new development into the existing fabric and reference the architectural styles of the period of significance. So for example, in Cleveland Park, looking at decorative limestone and aluminum panel inserts, as well as the use of lighter color beige bricks and incorporation of glass blocks, among other strategies. So in terms of next steps and some of the upcoming activities, the project team will be also presenting at the upcoming Cleveland Park Community Association meeting this Thursday, May 18th at 6:30 p.m., which will be located at the Cleveland Park Congregational United Church of Christ. Our project team will also be at the Friendship Heights Alliance Makers Market on Saturday, May 20th at 3 p.m. And then, as I mentioned, we will be presenting at HPRB's hearing on Thursday, May 25th. And then following the public comment period, the Office of Planning will revise the document and release a final Connecticut Avenue development guidelines later in the spring or the summer. Again, the project website is listed here, and you can also email me with any questions at any time. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Great. Well, that was really great. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've put the link about the public input website in the chat, and Bob also shared directly the information about connecting with HPRB and testifying there. So we're going to open it up for questions. If people would like, please use the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen, and I can call on people, and then we'll unmute you and you can ask your questions. Anybody? Yes, Bob. Sorry, you have to unmute.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was great. So I said a bunch of questions. I'll start with one question. Back in November of 2021, Steve Colcott came to our group and, sort of before this was even a thing, talked about what the development opportunities were in Cleveland Park. One of the sites he mentioned was the parking lot behind the Uptown Theater, which turns out is not in the commercial zone, but it is a 14,000 square foot lot. It's used as a parking lot for the post office right now. It's privately owned. Is there any opportunity to include that in the commercial zone for this area? It seems like something that would fit.
Right. Yeah. So I looked at that parking lot. It is not part of the future land use map designation. It is not part of the designated area as residential, medium, moderate, commercial. So it is still designated as low density residential. and therefore it's not really considered as part of this potential new zone for Cleveland Park for the commercial area.
And to amend the FLUM, does it have to go through the whole amendment cycle, or can it be a one-off?
I think that would need to go through the comprehensive plan amendment.
Okay.
Great. Anybody else? Questions? Or you can throw something in the chat. We'll try to answer it there. Bob again.
I got more questions.
You have more questions. Okay, sounds good.
So the Park and Shop, the example that was given in the draft guidelines, which built on top of the non-contributing portion of the Park and Shop, really kind of yielded a pretty small building with not a lot of housing in it. So two questions. One, did you guys discuss the possibility of building along that entire eastern leg of the parking shop and doing as you would do on the block to the south where there'd be a setback? That's question number one. Question number two, where you do have the example, which is at the end, the terminus, the southern point of the parking shop with the non-contributing, is there any possibility that could build into the actual parking lot itself, which looks like to be an equal or greater size area than the building that you used in the example? Not the entire parking lot, but at least the parking lot that's in front of that section. So those are my two questions on the parking shop.
Right. Yeah. So we looked at the existing contributing building. Just given the design of the roof line, it would just make it infeasible to build on top. And therefore, we focused on really the southern portion that is non-contributing, that is, considered non-contributing building. As it relates to building on the parking lot, we really focused on kind of the existing building line. That being said, the entire site is private property and is all part of one site. So potentially looking at extending the building further into the parking lot could be something that could come as a part of a proposed development. But we were really focused on keeping the building line. And then looking at, as part of the streetscape design guidelines, looking at kind of different interim as long as long-term scenarios for repurposing that space for kind of various public space use and community use, whether for kind of extending seating opportunities, park-like features, and plazas. So it was really looked at as kind of more of a public space amenity in the future.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody else? Questions? Yes, Todd.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for all of your fantastic work on this project. I'm sure it's a very complex thing to tackle. And I'm wondering, for people who may be interested in this project and following things, but perhaps they're, because one of the things you often hear in public meetings in Cleveland Park is, we don't want this to turn into Van Ness. And I'm wondering if there are other neighborhoods in the city where you feel like those neighborhoods have done a nice job implementing the kinds of guidelines that you're talking about here with the Woodley Park and Cleveland Park plans. And I understand that these are tailored to each neighborhood's specific needs and conditions and all that. But is there a place you could point us to where we could say this is a good example of a neighborhood doing something like this?
Sure. Yeah. So in the document, we include a lot of kind of example images and precedents of other buildings across the district that have kind of successfully integrated new development within historic fabric and within historic buildings. So Capitol Hill includes a lot of examples, especially around the Eastern Market area. 14th Street also includes a lot of examples, especially around U Street area. Those are both historic districts. They're subject to Historic Preservation Review Board evaluation and support. There's also kind of more recent examples around the Union Market area, which is also designated historic. Now, those are obviously greater densities, so the buildings there are of greater heights and densities, but just showing how, again, historic buildings can be preserved along with new development and new construction happening on top and around them.
Thank you.
Great. More questions?
I think there's one in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Oh, yes. So Bess is asking, if the heights are raised, what criteria will be put in place to protect birds from crashing into windows, and who will provide watering and maintenance for public green spaces? Thanks for that question.
I understand the concern with the birds crashing into windows and just the reflection of the glass. I'm not sure how and by who this is governed. I can kind of look into that further to see if there's something that governs it by the building code or other types of regulations, but I don't have an answer to that specifically right now. As it relates to the second half, the maintenance of green spaces, it depends on ownership. So if it's in the public, within the public right of way, that would be maintained by DDOT. If it's within private property, then that would be maintained by private property owners.
And then I guess the main streets can sort of straddle both of those.
That's correct. So if there are special features, for example, so the streetscape guidelines include ways in which to incorporate kind of wayfinding signage and directional signage. If there's special seating areas or special lighting, public art, it depends kind of who is leading the charge in maintaining those or installing those, and they would be the ones maintaining them. So for special features, typically, if it's installed through main streets, then main streets would be maintaining those.
And then on the, on the birds point, I guess the way I read the design recommendations, maybe it doesn't spell this out specifically, but I'm not guessing that, glass towers are what's going to be deemed historically compatible in either of these areas. There's going to be a lot of stone, punched windows, that type of thing. So it's not like a glass office building, if you will.
Yeah, that's correct. Especially that those are residential buildings, so they don't include the amount of glass facades that office buildings would typically look like. And yes, you're right, Bob, given the guidance on the materials to be using with kind of brick, limestone, to kind of reference the original historic buildings. Yeah, you're correct. The percentage of glass would not be to the degree that it would cause these issues that we see with office buildings.
Great. Cool. Anybody else? Yes, Luke. I'm unmuting you. Yes. Your question, Luke Lanciano.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Heba. I joined the presentation a little bit late, but I would be curious about the gas station location. Like, would there be developmental guidelines for that that little corner? Would it be possible to build a building in that lot? I know I think it's the West End, they have a location where there's like a gas station at the ground level and then a building above. And I'd be curious how these guidelines might affect that.
Yeah, gas stations are typically just a lot harder to redevelop, especially into residential, just because of the level of contamination that would need to be cleaned up. But yeah, I know the building you're referring to that has the gas station, and it has been done. There are examples of that. Again, it's a lot more complicated in their construction, but they have been done in the past.
But it's a single site and it's a lot less complicated than site assembly on the 3400 block, maybe.
And it doesn't have a historic building, so, but there are different considerations on each site.
Great. Anybody else? Well, I had a question. Is there, we want to support and come testify at HPRB next week. What, in your opinion, is the most effective thing that we could say to convey to HPRB that, that we're really in support of this project? Like, specifically, what could we tell HPRB? What is it they want to hear from the community versus, from other experts such as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in support, I think we're looking for kind of HPRB's support of this document in a way that essentially says that they would be using it for evaluating future development proposals, and that the Historic Preservation Office staff would be using this document again also in their evaluation. So just gaining support for the design strategies within that document, and is this kind of appropriate guidance that, and is this enough guidance for HPRB to be able to use this document and reference it in the future as development proposals come in? And then ultimately, this document is going to inform kind of zoning changes in those areas. So especially as development proposals come at the densities and heights that are outlined in this document, and making sure that there is support for that to maximize, and increase the potential for housing in the Cleveland Park and Woodley Park areas.
Great. We have another question in the chat. Mary is saying that she hasn't had a chance to read the draft yet, but she noticed that there's several businesses in Cleveland Park that appear unused. Is there any proposal by the city to buy out any of those properties currently?
No, I mean, these are all private properties. They're owned by private property owners. So it would be all subject to private development.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the district have a private, purchase to develop program?
No.
No.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
That
Bob,
wasn't my question.
you had a question? Another question?
I did. So when you were talking about, the different contexts, like if you're building, so the 3400 block east side of Connecticut Avenue, where the service lane, that area, which is largely 1 or 2 story in the middle. If you were to build above that, there would be setbacks, and behind it, there'd be step downs. But there isn't really, and you use the term like greater setback or setback. And these are really kind of vague terms. And I feel like this is the area where a building that could provide a lot of housing gets to provide a lot less housing because we're kind of vague in this area. Are there any dimensions that we can ascribe to what a minimum setback would look like and what a deeper setback would look like?
So it's really a case by case basis. And, we've, the team includes, the Historic Preservation Office, and it just depends on the type of development and the design that's coming through. It depends on the considerations for kind of preserving the structural integrity. So what is it going to take to ensure that the structural integrity of these existing historic buildings are maintained, So there are structural issues as well as design issues that come up with these types of developments, and it's hard to say this is the exact range that it has to be. So there just needs to be a little bit more flexibility in that area.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? Oh, a follow-up question. Have there been any examples of communities finding ways to revamp or replace existing private businesses, where the community can like somehow, you know, maybe spur on development?
So I think main streets can sometimes work with businesses and property owners to figure out ways to fill in empty vacant spaces if they're vacant, or other businesses that need some restoration work or renovations, kind of raising some money or finding some grants to support those businesses. So typically main streets, you know, they try to work with property owners and businesses to you know, to make sure that they're sustaining.
I'll put a plug in for Commissioner Tammy Gordon, who's like a one-person dynamo recruiting effort for Cleveland Park Main Street. But I mean, I think, yeah, Main Street does that. I mean, our director of our farmers market was responsible for recruiting Crack Deggery to take over the old Tino's Pizzeria space.
So get involved with the Main Street. Yeah. So Bob, you had another question.
I did. I think everyone, as they look at development potential in our commercial areas, look for the possibility of adding not just housing but affordable housing. And we have, as you explained in your presentation, the IZ Plus, which as you add increased density in the zoning, your requirement to provide affordability goes up. This is new, and I don't know if you have a good sense of what the track record of IZ Plus is. I know of lots of examples, not lots, but still, maybe 4 or 5, where owners decided not to file for a map amendment and engage IZ Plus, and rather just went with what they had, matter of right in front of them without upzoning, which is discouraging. And so this is a long way around to my question, which is actually about parking. One of the things that increases the cost of a building is the provision of parking. And when DC redid their zoning code back in 2016, it cut parking requirements for areas that are adjacent to transit. Since then, states like Oregon, California, Charlotte, North Carolina, Newark, New Jersey, I mean, the list goes on, where they've actually eliminated parking requirements around transit. Is this an opportunity for this to be a pilot for DC to eliminate parking requirements when we go to rezone the Cleveland Park and Woodley Park commercial areas? Not to say that a private developer could put in parking if they wanted, but that the city wouldn't require them to.
Yeah, I think this would require kind of a very different type of study, honestly. And that is kind of beyond the purview of this document. This document operates under the conditions of the current zoning regulations, and what they allow, whether it's parking or IZ Plus or anything else. So yeah, I think it goes a little bit beyond the scope of what this study is intended to look at. And it's something that would need to be looked at district-wide. But yeah, parking increases costs, but there's also marketability of a building. And it's, the developers kind of have to work on pros and cons, like what minimum parking do they need to provide in order to make a residential building marketable for people. Yes, it's on top of transit, but some residents might still opt to have a car, and it's kind of up to developers to kind of do that type of market analysis and determine how much parking. And I say that because whether it's providing the bare minimum that is on top of a transit, providing a little bit more, it's going to be up to the developers, but at a minimum, it's going to be per the zoning regulations.
Great. Anyone else? Oh, Luke's asking, isn't IZ plus at the proposed level functionally a poison pill for increased density? Are there any examples of it being utilized? Not sure.
So I guess I would ask for more clarity about it being a poison pill.
Do you want to? Yeah. Luke, if you
Yeah, I guess what I mean is that like the level of IZ requirement in that density level might tends to make projects like unfeasible. And I'd be curious if the level of IZ required for maximum density in the commercial corridor of Cleveland Park, like whether that level of density and IZ has been accomplished anywhere else in the city.
Yeah.
I'd just be curious of an example.
So a couple of things I'd say is, one, IZ Plus is fairly new, and we still need to evaluate kind of the effectiveness of it and how much it's been utilized and how much has actually been constructed under IZ Plus. I don't have that information. But on the other hand, in this case, so there's the time factor. So if a developer is coming forward with a zoning map amendment, there's a cost associated with that process for the developer. In the case like what we're contemplating with Cleveland Park and Woodley Park, where OP would lead the zoning map amendment. So OP would be the ones kind of introducing the zoning map amendment to the zoning commission. That would at least kind of reduce the unpredictability and the time factor with developers themselves coming in with a zoning map amendment, and therefore potentially making it a little bit more economically feasible for those types of developments to happen in the future. I hope that kind of makes sense. So, and when IZ Plus was introduced, the Office of Planning went through kind of a year-long process of doing an economic analysis to kind of understand what is that range of set-aside percentage that we can kind of ask for, and yet still make sure that developments kind of make economic sense. And that's why that sliding scale was determined, where depending on how much extra density a developer is asking for, they're subject to anywhere from 12% to 20% set aside. In the case of Cleveland Park, if they're utilizing that maximum FAR, then the set aside could potentially go up to 20%.
So I had a question. I work over by NUMA, and I see just a huge number of buildings like going up around, that particular station. How important is it that we, use these guidelines and, that we get more residences built like in this area of the city? Like, can you give us, like, put it in the context of, the city's goals as a whole to build housing?
Sure, yeah. So, just looking at the district as a whole, again, Rock Creek West, or the area west of Rock Creek Park, that makes up, almost lines up with the boundaries of Ward 3, essentially have the least number of dedicated affordable housing units in the district, compared to other, what we call planning areas. The district is kind of divided up into 10 planning areas. And so Rock Creek West has the least dedicated, at least number of dedicated affordable units, and therefore has the largest goal for production of affordable units. And that's why we're looking at, right now we're looking at commercial corridors and transit-oriented corridors, especially on top of metro stations where we can increase housing opportunities and housing choice, and therefore access to opportunities and access to jobs when you're living on top of a metro station and have that type of access. So increasing those opportunities across the district and in areas especially that haven't seen much development happen in the last several decades.
Great. So, okay, anybody else have questions? Bob, again. Oh, wait, we've got Abigail. I'm going to let her ask a question because you've asked a lot, Bob.
Yeah, I just have a question about, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but is there something similar going on for the Tenleytown corridor?
Yes, that's correct. Friendship Heights and Tenleytown. So there is the Wisconsin Avenue Development Framework, and I can drop in a link in the chat in a second, but there is a parallel planning initiative along Wisconsin Avenue that is focused on Friendship Heights and Tenleytown, and again, opportunities for housing development in those two areas, as well as kind of looking at the positioning of the commercial market in those areas and just the changing market conditions, and right-sizing retail and commercial uses in those two neighborhoods, especially in Friendship Heights.
Yeah, because I mean, I just feel like Tenleytown in particular is one of the most aesthetically missed opportunities you could think of. It just doesn't, I think it just, we have a metro station, which lots of students and other people around, a kind of busy neighborhood, but the like retail that's right near there is like pretty limited. It just seems like there's a lot of opportunities for developing up there. And in addition to sort of integrating more housing, it also seems that it would be useful to be integrating like more public gathering space, because there's just like nowhere for people to like have there's no town square, there's nowhere for people to run into each other. You're basically just stuck on Wisconsin Avenue.
Yeah.
Depressing.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely another thing that planning initiative is looking at, is opportunities for improving and increasing usable public spaces, and also looking at opportunities for breaking up some of the larger blocks, especially, and kind of creating more pedestrian through connections and more just opportunities for public gathering spaces, and outdoor dining and cafe seating. So yeah, there is a public realm strategy as part of that as well.
Especially because around Tenleytown, you actually have quite a lot of open space, but it's kind of bisected by all these roads. So it basically is grass, because people wouldn't want to gather in the middle of it because there's just cars whizzing.
Yeah, definitely. I dropped the link in the chat. Sorry, I think my connection dropped for a second, but yeah, definitely feel free to visit that website. And we're anticipating a release of a draft for the Wisconsin Avenue Development Framework, potentially sometime in June or early summer.
Great. We have one more question in the chat from Stephen Marcus. What steps need to be taken to approve OP's guidelines, and what is the estimated timeline? So maybe just go over again, like what we need to do, what from here.
So again, we're looking to get feedback on those guidelines by May 26th. We're hoping to get support from HPRB, or at least get their feedback in the May 25th hearing. And whether we need to go back with another draft or a final later in the summer, we'll find out, and we'll have that discussion as part of the May 25th hearing. And I know the ANC are having a meeting next week as well on this topic. So just kind of getting support from ANC and the community and HPRB on those documents and feedback that we can use to finalize it and release it in the summer.
Great. Oh, one more question in the chat. Is the city able to purchase one or more lots and then utilize a builder property manager to help meet the housing needs within Cleveland Park zone? That may be a route to getting full density and make the IZ plus requirements more feasible. I'm not sure.
I don't know that there are plans to purchase any properties, especially commercial properties along that corridor. So right now it's kind of looking at a path of private development.
Okay, Bob, one more, you can get the last question.
Okay. There's a lot of great public realm recommendations, particularly south of Cleveland Park, since we're kind of going through our streetscape right now. What I'm most excited about is your suggestions around the zoo and widening the sidewalk. I just want to make clear that just because they're in these guidelines does not make them self-actuating, right? That would have to be a plan that someone funds, maybe the council member gets behind, and what have you.
Yes, that's correct. So if it's a public investment, then it would need to be funded through capital improvement projects, and then there's going to need to be coordination, obviously, between DDOT, the city and the Smithsonian, to kind of get a better understanding of what it's going to take to widen the sidewalk there. And then, further south in Woodley Park, streetscape improvements could happen through private development as they come forward. They would go through the Public Space Committee review, which would use the streetscape guidelines in this document to inform the type of improvements that need to happen along the frontage of a private development. So it's kind of a mix. I know you're focused on the zoo, and your question was focused on the zoo, and yeah, that would need to be kind of more of a collaborative effort between the city and the Smithsonian, as well as the need to fund that type of project.
Yeah.
But those guidelines can at least be used as a starting point to start those conversations and to kind of look at potential.
Great.
And the restaurant cap can go away? Sorry, I had one more question.
That would be something that we would be looking at as part of the zoning changes for both Cleveland Park and Woodley Park. I know we've heard a lot about the cap, as from community members, from business owners, from developers, that it is something that is of its time, and it needs to be looked at differently now.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Heba, for coming tonight and giving us your time. I know it's valuable. And so we've put everything in the chat, and we're recording this so you can go back and watch this. We will also send out additional emails through our email list about the information about how to attend the ANC meeting next Monday and to testify at HPRB next Thursday. I believe also that there is a trash pickup that we're doing next Saturday. Is that correct, Bob?
Yep, Saturday, May 20th, 3:30. We're meeting up by the corner of Porter in Connecticut.
Okay.
Ariel Kennedy is doing this from our group, but it's for the Cleveland Park Main Street. And bags, gloves, pickers, and we go up and down the corridor, and we meet at Nanny's at 4 o'clock.
Yep. So join us there, and just look for your emails. We'll provide some more information, about this. But yeah, thanks everybody again for attending tonight, and we look forward to your support. Bob, did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah, I just want to say I sent around an email on our listserv that had the link to the ANC's draft resolution, which came out today.
Oh yeah.
And so look at that, and then get your feedback into the ANC. So they meet a week from tonight. So all at anc3.org hits all the commissioners. I see a few on here.
3c.org, Bob.
What did I say?
Just
something wrong. I said something wrong.
Yes, it's all at anc3c.org.
There it is.
Oh yeah, there you go.
And
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, Heba says continue to, go to that public input website, provide your comments that way. But, it does really help if you can in any way, testify actually at the HPRB hearing. It's actually not, now that they do it online, it's much easier. You can kind of have it on another screen and keep doing your work, and then just, hop on and give your testimony and then go away. It's really actually very effective that way. And I'm so glad that they went to that sort of hybrid way so that you don't have to take like 3 hours out of your day and go to a building. So yeah, I encourage people to do that. Great.
Well, we'll send that out via email, ways people can do all this engagement.
Great. Well, thanks again for coming, Heba. And
yeah, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Have a
Thanks,
good evening.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.